This is Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. On the show, you'll hear from innovators in the food space. We'll have disruptive conversations with people from around the globe who are taking the lead on topics like food sustainability, ending world hunger, food security, and so much more. I'm your host, Paul Newnham. In today's episode, I'm joined by Professor Jacqueline McGlade. Jackie has over 40 years of experience in science and policy. She's the former Chief Scientist of the United Nations Environment Programme and the former head of the European Environment Agency in the European Union. In today's conversation, we discuss Jackie's impressive career. You'll hear about her work in the UN Environment Programme. Jackie will talk about the importance of regenerative farming in climate resilience. And we'll discuss the intersection between traditional knowledge and modern technology in addressing climate change. Let's start the conversation. I'm super excited to be here today with Professor Jackie McGlade. Jackie, can you introduce yourself?
I'm currently living in Kenya. That I think is a quite important point for this interview, this podcast. But I was previously the Chief Scientist in the United Nations Environment Programme. And then prior to that, I was sitting in the European Union as the head of the European Environment Agency. So sort of 40 years of science and policy and really trying to reach out to people.
So tell me, the UN Environment Programme, it's based in Kenya, is that right?
That's right. And the reason why it's in Nairobi, because it was a hotly contested process to actually arrive at a country, is that the then Secretary General decided that we should have headquarters of UN agencies outside of New York. And UNEP, really because it talks to people, it talks to the environment, was one of the ones that was chosen. So here we are in Nairobi, the United Nations Environment Programme, surrounded by, of course, all the others. But it gives a certain weight to Kenya, because then when matters to do with the environment are brought up, we now have what's called the Environment Assembly, which is like the General Assembly, but for the environment. So it's a very, very important body that can make decisions around all sorts of things, marine plastics, climate change, many other things.
And the focus of the UN Environment Programme, what does the UN Environment Programme focus on?
Well, it sounds quite highbrow because I would characterize it as a normative organization. In other words, it tries to set the rules of international law and agreements. Many countries, when it was first set up, never had environment ministers. They didn't even have environmental regulations and laws. So the role of UNEP was to demonstrate the power of having that kind of structure and infrastructure and legislation, how to do it, and what the benefits were. And quite honestly, if you think about many countries, they have borders, so whatever happens in their neighborhood and in the neighboring jurisdictions will affect what happens inside a country. So you need an international body that, so to speak, can arbitrate or at least look over the fence to make sure that those regulations are fit for purpose.
We're at COP28 here in Dubai. This is the 28th COP. You were the head of the UN Environment Programme for 10 of the years that COP was on. What are you hopeful and optimistic about now compared to back then?
I think overall for climate change, the level of urgency has really finally woken many people up. I started together with my predecessor, something called the Emissions Gap Report. And it was a very challenging report because it effectively said, okay, this is what you said you were going to do to member states, and this is where we are. And the gap was just too much for people to take in. But gradually each year, people have taken that report more and more seriously. And it has galvanized people to realize that we are not doing this thing called bend the trend. The trend of emissions is not going down. So what then happens is agencies like UNEP, the Food and Agriculture and other bodies try to create solutions, nature-based solutions, that will help the whole world bend the trend so that it's not just simply industrialized countries.
And you were at the UN Environment Programme until when?
2017 is when I left, yeah.
What are you doing now? Have you retired, leaning back and watching it all happen, or are you...
Would that were the case. No, I realized that I wanted to do something at speed and at scale. So I had enough knowledge around the data and the information that was there on the environment, and particularly around carbon and land, So I basically put together an invention which allowed me to build a digital twin of the world in a company called DownForce Technologies. And what is a digital twin? Well, it's literally a digital rendition of any part of the world at very fine scale. You prod it and poke it and you see what happens. And the measure I'm interested in is soil carbon, because land is the basis of everything that we do. So that's what we measure.
So you measure carbon. How do you do that?
We bring data from all the important elements of what makes soil work. So the terrain, the aspect, the soil, the biome, the biology, the climatology, and so forth. And we build essentially a functional model using those data, using real observations to tell us how similar soils are, even on a single farm. And it's highly variable. And that's really important, because if you make the assumption that all land is the same, then you get a very bad headache when you try to realize that you're not doing what you think you're going to do. So that sort of level of granularity, that description, allows me to then look every 10 days at what's happening anywhere in the world.
Sounds quite complicated. So every 10 days you can see what's going on around the world.
Yes, but what we try to do is not impose a sort of big brother. So we go where we're asked. We have clients and customers who own land and who pay for us to then look in detail, back 6 years, every 10 days, every 10 meters squared, what is happening on their land. So it's like an audit, like a forensic audit.
And so how does this help people? How does this help our climate, our food system? What's the outcome?
So for the farmer and the landowner, it gives them a unique picture of what has worked where. So maybe they did an experiment, maybe they tried some biofertilizer, did it work? Well, we can see what was the outcome, and we can do it quite accurately or very accurately, and that gives them confidence of the things that are working and the things that aren't.
So they can drive investment and all kinds of things, and much more targeting, I guess.
Absolutely. And then let's say farmers are interested in carbon or soil health. When they buy new land, it tells them actually what they're buying, because the value of the land in money terms has got nothing to say about how healthy this land is.
So it's like a quality measure.
Exactly. So we tell them about the health, the resilience of the land. So if you're buying land, and then if you're a banker and you want to give a green loan, you want to make sure your farmer or landowners are going to be in business. So you know that the kind of actions or activities getting a loan for, boreholes or fences or whatever, is this really a good investment from the bank? And then finally, now with carbon markets emerging, we need to have financial grade data. And that's precisely what DownForce Technologies does.
So you're working on this. What's an example of where you've seen this really drive a change in behavior or a different way of viewing something?
Well, in Kenya, for example, we can see already that the farmers who move to regenerative farming, literally leaving behind their world of fertilizers, are securing higher levels of soil carbon almost straight away, which leads to higher productivity. But crucially, it brings water to the surface. It means they have less runoff. In a place like Australia, then it gives a lot of confidence to farmers who've been doing things intuitively, and now they actually see the evidence, which means that they can show their neighbors, and then their neighbors pay attention. So there's a personal, a psychological, as well as a practical reason where this is really working.
I imagine there's a lot of interest in this from different areas. What's the adoption like? How are people sort of getting involved?
Well, we've been using our networks, to be honest, to make sure that this is really something which has got high integrity. We have many, many clients who come. We do a pilot with them. We have a 50% conversion rate into coming back clients, which I think is quite phenomenal. So, and all of them have been impressed with the data and with the information they've received. So we've never really lost anybody. That's the incredible thing.
And so we're at COP here in Dubai, and in terms of just some of the applications of this kind of technology, what kind of conversations have you had? Is there any interesting threads, even in the negotiations, what you're hearing about that connect this kind of technology solution that I guess it's a solution, and accessing data and organizing data, I guess, into what you're hearing here?
Well, I like to be more practical in a sense. The data are very, very important, but what's really practical is what kind of crops will we be able to grow in an ever-warming world? And what this can demonstrate is that as land maybe loses carbon, is sort of breathing and losing carbon, then we need to find ways to either keep the carbon in the ground, So that's a big conversation that I'm hearing. How can we retain that kind of organic matter in the soils? But detecting it is really important because it happens very quickly. And secondly, I believe that there's a sort of maturity now, that these are not sort of slightly boutique, quirky technologies. This is almost going to be the same as you take your car to the garage and get it serviced. Well, you get your land serviced. You go and check it out. It's like having the engine. Is it running well? These are the kinds of data that will help us really understand if we're anticipating what's happening and adapting towards any kind of climate change.
And is there foods that you're seeing, different kinds of crops that are having a bigger impact on farms and the carbon in the soil?
Well, I was really surprised. We did some work on new varieties of wheat and beans and lupins and legumes. And literally you can see that every crop, if used well inside a crop rotation, has the capacity to store some carbon. But there are some super crops, like some of the legumes, beans, lupins and others, which if you put them in the right succession, can not only store carbon, but give increased yields. And I think this is the kind of data that we've never had before. And this is what's going to propel us to realize that it's not just about the food that we're growing, it's about what that food growing activity is doing for the land. So farmers can become carbon farmers.
As you're talking, I guess I often think about food and it's about the impact or reducing the impact, but this is actually adding impact. So it's not only what it does for you as a human, the health and all of that, but it's also the addition of growing these things and the improvement in soil.
Absolutely. And the combination of cover crops and different kinds of crops includes and increases the microbiology, the diversity that's there. But it also helps to support an entire series of ecosystem services, as we call them. Water, biodiversity, plants that are not in the cropping regime, but are actually accompanying a lot of these productions.
So you mentioned that you live in Kenya. Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing in Kenya. Where do you live? How does this technology connect in, but also your other broader work?
Well, I have a slightly weird story, which is I'm married to one of the chiefs in the Maasai tribe.
Oh, wow.
Which brings me to really confront this problem of the droughts, the floods, massive death of our cattle, the pastoralist life being under threat. So generally, what we now have to think of is a future for those lands, which is not what has happened in the past. And that means improving grasslands, changing from grasses that have come in from elsewhere back to native grasses with deep roots. Interestingly, some of those grasses have seeds which previously were consumed. They were actually eaten for a kind of porridge and that. So I see a genuine opening up from the research world to recognize what already exists in the landscape, but in small patches. So that's in the pastoral, the savanna areas. In the forest areas, what I'm absolutely convinced of now is that we should not take people out of forests. If people are living and coexisting and creating agricultural outcomes within a forest setting, the forest benefits, the food benefits, it's highly nutritious, especially if you don't use a lot of fertilizers and chemicals. But actually people benefit from living in that sort of environment. So tea, coffee, yes, but all the other crops together with the medicinal. And why I say that, medicinal trees, which are in the forests, they release volatile organic compounds which are highly beneficial. They have huge immunological response to humans. They get absorbed by the plants that are being grown, and then we consume them. Imagine how powerful that really is. You're getting medicine through your actual food that will help raise your immune system as well as making it nutrient dense.
That must be, it's like a living lab for you, being able to be in that environment. I want to understand a little bit about, with changing climate as well, what kinds of things are you seeing really kind of accelerate at the moment? Like you talked a little bit about the droughts and then the floods. What are some of those other shifts that you're seeing and picking up on?
Well, there are certainly areas now where you can't grow the crops they're used to growing, maize and others. They're right on the very edge. And that's because the soils have become degraded and depleted. So trying to grow maize doesn't work. So now the question is, what do you do? And I think there's a move afoot to put more effort into putting trees into the landscape, alley cropping and so forth, creating nuts and other value added. But ultimately, what I can see is that if we don't intervene with, I would say, the holistic picture of systems like biofertilizers and really thinking about land, many farmers will not have the kind of capabilities, the education, the background, because we're now asking them to do something for which they don't have any knowledge. It's not traditional knowledge. You normally wouldn't be dealing with these sorts of degraded landscapes. I think that's what's needed now, is more and more people being exposed to some of the clever ideas, the new ideas about the soil microbiome. So I'm not saying it's a myth that Indigenous knowledge can't have much of the solution. But honestly, people are now being pushed into environments that they've never been in before.
I mean, one of the things I like to think about is we have to look back, but we also have to look forward. And it's about acknowledging and learning from the past and from the Indigenous knowledge that's there, but also thinking about the technology, the ever-changing world that we're living in, and how we adapt, I guess.
And I think that's what DownForce, what I have in the heart of it is I'm trying to build an intelligence which is about what works where.
Yeah.
Because as people move into these new ecosystems and regimes, there is somewhere else on the planet where people have lived like that for a very long time. And so by being able to get that knowledge into the new places, that's how we can make progress.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people are, like in meetings like we're in at the moment, sometimes you find people looking for the solution rather than a series of solutions. And I think, for me, that's always something which I reflect on. You're saying this tool, though, helps us understand the different solutions that are out there. And so it's a solution, and it's talking about lots of solutions.
And it can't be done by one. It has to be done as an enormous marketplace, sort of a mosaic, because everyone's experience of their context will generate that little bit of extra knowledge about what to do where. So there is no science book that does this. There is no one sort of document. But by having a network of so many people out there experiencing what they see in the land and translating that into a common kind of knowledge pool can only help us.
No, absolutely. Well, Jackie, this has been fascinating. I really appreciate the time to talk to you. And there is so much that you're working on that is so critical for the future of the planet. Where can people find out more?
Well, they can go to DownForce Technologies, of course, and I have a lot of stuff on my wiki page and my LinkedIn pages, so Jackie McGlade.
Are you going to write a book soon?
I have a book. It's called Natural Prosperity, and it's in the making.
Ooh, so it's out or it's not out?
It's halfway written, but I have a special chapter called The Science of Deliciousness, which is all about food.
Tell me more. What would you say is your favourite food?
Oh, my favourite food is rapidly becoming celeriac and beans together.
Celeriac and beans. And how do you prepare that, or does somebody prepare that for you?
It's a very traditional Maasai sort of mixture.
Okay.
It's not quite the Kenyan one, githeri, but it's got lots of weird herbs in it, which you
Okay.
can only get in the Maasai. But celeriac kind of emulates some of the flavours, that slightly bitter, sweet flavour that it brings. So, yeah.
Amazing. Well, thank you, Jackie, and really appreciate you taking time out during COP28 to have a conversation with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Future Fork, a show that explores the world of food and the decisions we can make today that will shape our future. Future Fork is produced by Disruptive Consulting Solutions and supports the SDG2 Advocacy Hub. For more info, head to the website futureforkpodcast.com. This show was produced with strategy and production support from Wavelength Creative. So you don't miss an episode of Future Fork, make sure to subscribe to or follow the show in your podcast app. And while you're there, leave us a 5-star review. It really helps others find the show. I'm Paul Newnham, and I'll see you in the next episode.